Hello friends, and welcome back. I had worked on this tag project a couple of weeks ago and I did one side fall, one side Halloween. So now I wanted to show you how I put together the Halloween side. So this is gonna cover me putting this elements together first, and then at the very end of the video you'll see how I made those elements. So if you're not interested in that, you can just watch the part where I'm putting it together and creating it to look like this. So to begin with, I have a stash of my Halloween stamps and die cuts that I wanted to use for this project. It did take me a little bit longer than I thought it would, just because there were so many things I wanted to include in this little tiny album. So I started with just cutting things out. I think if you'd seen my video about compartmentalized card making, this was a similar concept. I just spent a few evenings stamping out some images and die cutting some things, and eventually I had enough material to fill my book. So this is what I kind of put together. So all these elements are already pre-made. So in this part, I'm just going to show you how I'm putting it all together. I'll just play some music for you and you can enjoy the process. So I hope you enjoyed watching that process go together. Next, I wanted to use these little twine pieces that I had that are gray and white. I wanted it to match the fall side as well as the Halloween side, so I picked a neutral color. And right now I'm just putting them inside all of the little holes and making them all match, and then I will trim them down. So I had this little ghost that I had made out of resin last year. I had made some earrings and some necklaces for my Etsy shop, and this was one that didn't turn out too great, so I decided I would use it on my album. I'm just adhering it with this 3-in-1 beacon glue, and it's clear so it won't show through once it's dried. And it's very strong, so I was wanting a glue that wasn't going to come off over time. And it's got some holographic film in the background, and that's what makes it that kind of purpley blue color in the light, and then also orange in other lighting. So that finishes up how I put this album together. Now, if you're interested to see all of these individual elements, how I made them, that's the next portion coming. So we're gonna go over how I made all of these little elements. I did use a little black light here so you could see some of the glow in the dark texture paste I used on the moon there, and on one of those little cards, the purple and orange one, and it just made the whole background kind of glow purpley and spooky, so I thought it looked really nice with the black light. And now for the next part, we're going to go over all of these details. I'll go over some of the parts that are maybe a little more intricate in case you want to make these yourself or make something similar. So these little slopes or landslides, I guess, I had used just a edge die that I found at Dollar Tree actually, and I kind of matched up where one hill ended and the next hill would start, and it just kind of it was a tedious process. So if you're wanting to do something like that, you just have to take your time doing it. And then I wanted to show you how I dressed them up. So at first I was using the Hickory Smoke Oxide ink, and it didn't show up very well. I wanted to use some of the spray stains with the mica powder, so I ended up using the Iron Gate and the Specimen. It's kind of like a greenish color to make it look like maybe a little bit of moss at the top of this. At first I was thinking hills, but once I put this little design on there, they kind of looked more like wall texture, like some cobblestone wall texture. So I thought it still went well with the Halloween theme. Now to glue these all together, I decided I wanted to only glue the edges and leave the center part or the inside area with no glue, because some of the elements I ended up adding I wanted to tuck inside the little hills or wall side. So that's why I did only the edges. They ended up being like little pockets. Now I wanted to make a little pumpkin element and this little witch hat. I cut this witch hat out of a jelly print that I had made with some black and some silver. And then this little pumpkin was cut out one of my jelly plates that had orange and some shimmer on top. Now I wanted to put a little face on him. I found in my stash a face that fit perfectly on this little pumpkin. It didn't actually come with this set, but I liked how it turned out. I glued the little witch hat on, and now I have this cute little pumpkin witch. Next I'm making these little monster elements. So this was the background piece here is an alcohol inked jelly print that I had done a couple weeks ago, and it didn't really turn out, or the design didn't really show up very well on this jelly print, so I wanted to use those colors as my background to these little stamped images here. So I did this little monster. This is the little set here. I used the little bat, and then I also used the cat and the trick or treat. I used my finger to try to put some oil onto those stamps to get them to stamp better, and that didn't work too well, so I used my little nail file just to give the texture or some coarseness to those stamps, and it did hold the ink a lot better. So if you're having a hard time getting your inks to not be blobby on the stamp, you might want to try using just a real fine nail file over the top of them, but don't overdo it because you don't want to change the design of it. I used a little tag die cut that I had and cut out the little trick or treat, and it didn't have enough orange, so I'm just adding some spiced marmalade to give it a little bit more orange. So as I was making all of these elements, I wanted to come up with some kind of a consistent thing going throughout these little pages. So besides the bottom part that kind of ties them all together, the little cobblestone-y looking land, I also wanted to have a word or some kind of almost like a title on each of the mini pages, and then I wanted to have a little element or a little design or scene for each of them. So that was kind of my idea going in. So as I'm making these, I'm putting together a word or some kind of a word background, and then a picture or element background, and then kind of tying them all together with the black paper around some item in each of the pages. So if you're planning to make a little mini book like this, it doesn't have to be Halloween themed. As you'll see in my next video, I'm going to be doing a fall themed one. You can do this for Christmas, you could do it for birthday or someone's anniversary. You could put pictures in this, but I would just suggest coming up with some kind of theme or cohesiveness that ties through all the pages and kind of brings them all together. Or my other idea was to have like a storytelling. My stamps didn't really create a story, or maybe I just wasn't creative enough to come up with a storyline, so that's why I kind of went with this instead, where I just had a title, an element or a cluster of elements, and the bottom layer to bring them all together. So you may notice I'm using a lot of water or watercolor technique in a lot of these elements, and I'm using watercolor paper, Canson watercolor paper, 140 pound I believe, and the stamps, I am stamping them in the oxides, so the Distress Oxide. This one, it's Wilted Violet, the Spiced Marmalade, and the Crackling Campfire. And at this point, you know, for each of the elements, I was kind of off camera stamping them with my stamping tool. I have the Tim Holtz stamping tool, and I kept the stamp in the same alignment. So what I would do is I would stamp it in the different colors and then watercolor them, and after the watercolor dried, and I didn't care that there was this bleeding happening because I knew I was going to stamp over it in black ink. I wanted to add a little shimmer to this particular one, so I used this unraveled distress mica stain and just wanted to give it a little bit of shine. It's a nice neutral color, so it didn't take away from the purple or the orange that was already in the oxide inks that I was painting with. I wanted to make sure that most of my elements also kind of looked like they went together, so I used unraveled for any white so that I had more of an off-white on any elements if I was able to. I decided to tear the edges of this one, and in most of these little titles that have the black paper, I did some sort of tearing, either to one side, all sides, or a few sides, or on occasion I would just fold the edges. For any solid stamps that you might have, I used this technique that was really fun, and it doesn't have to be a Halloween themed. So if you're interested in how I made these, they were solid stamps and I was using multiple different colors on them. And for this case, because it is Halloween, I did kind of get a little bit messy with how I was layering the colors on top. I didn't care that there were some solid lines in different areas, and it was a little bit blotchy because that was kind of the theme I was going for, was a little bit messy. It's Halloween and kind of grungy. So you could certainly do this a lot smoother with a little dauber. You can take the color and daub it on and get a really nice blend of the two colors, or three colors. So this is just my process for coloring in these little ticket elements that I wanted to put into the album that you saw me put in earlier. I realized I didn't have a lot of green on this album at first, so I did use this Wicked Elixir, the Harvest Moon, and the Burning Ember. They're kind of more like fall colors, but they did work with the theme of this Halloween side, and I really thought the Wicked Elixir was kind of light. It didn't stand out as much as like that Burning Ember was taking over, so I just kind of worked with it and tried to get them to blend nicely. I needed a little more contrast in this piece, so I used the Specimen, which is a really cool color. It kind of looks brown, but it also kind of looks green, so it made a really nice border to this kind of orange, yellowy, green piece. In my last video, I had showed how I made a moon, and it was with Crackle medium. So this time I wanted to make a moon with some of the glow paste, grip paste glow. And I'm using some leftover mica stains that were already on my mat in the green, the Wicked Elixir, the Specimen, Harvest Moon, and the Burning Ember. And I'm just gonna, after it dries, I'm using that Specimen to create these little craters on the moon. I used this art spatula to add the grip paste glow, and I wanted to not cover up the design because this paste is not see-through or translucent, so I was trying to be careful and put the paste mostly in the open areas that I didn't have much of a design. And I did go over the little craters a little bit because I wanted them to look like they were part of the texture of this glow paste. I still had a lot of that spray stain, mica spray stain left on my mat, so I used this leftover piece of watercolor paper that I had, and I started just coloring a background that I ended up using for these words, and I turned this into almost like a sign, a stacked sign for my Haunted Mansion page. I used a marker to draw a line kind of connecting each of these little word elements, and that was my background of my sign. And then off camera, I cut out around each of these little sign elements, and to make them actually look like little signs, I just used that same black marker and drew a border around each of those little signs. For this little candy corn piece, I stamped the same concept I was using before. So anytime I had a stamp with an open design like this one, I would use the ink to kind of watercolor and pull from, and anytime it was a closed stamp, then I would just stamp the entire thing and use that as the coloring. So that's how I was able to try to keep the colors kind of consistent throughout this. So I used the Hickory Smoke as my white, and then once I had the outline, I just colored it in with some water. And I got a little yellow on my top piece that was supposed to be white, so I just bleached it out by using water and a dryer brush, and I sopped up some of that water. So it ended up looking more like a off-white. For the yellow, it wasn't very bright, so I had stamped out some of the spice marmalade and the fossilized amber on the side, and I used that to color in a little bit more. Here I used some Crackling Campfire to pull out these little design pieces on this candy corn stamp. I wanted to add a little shimmer, and on almost all of my elements I did this. I found colors that matched well with whatever the design was I was making. So for this one, for the white part, I used the Phantom Mist just to give it a little shine up there. I used Burning Ember to outline the orange part, and then for the yellow I used the Harvest Moon. So that finishes out the Halloween side of this fun tag mini album. If you're wanting to see the next part, I'm going to be posting about the fall side of the mini album. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already.